Hello guys, and welcome to the next video for Minecraft Education Edition. In the last lesson we looked at how we could try and build solid shapes using repetitions and kind of looping structure, or in computing we call this iteration, which is the process of looping and repeating. And we made a solid square, and I set you the challenge of making a solid kind of triangle as well, but said I would share that solution at the start of this session. So I'll get onto that shortly. I just want to explain that the kind of core objective of this lesson is to try and introduce the thought of using a function in Minecraft EDU for things which we tend to keep repeating and we want to call upon instead of having to repeat code. So we'll be moving on to that as well today. So let's start by having a look at the actual triangle puzzle I set you. So here is the code for the actual square initially, and you'll notice here I've made use of a variable at the top of the code which I've set to 5. Now depending on what size I wanted the square, you can change that variable here in the code, and then that would make a square of that size. And if you look further down, I've got this block of code here, which is to do with giving our little guy some bricks and putting them in his kind of almost his what you call his hotbar and into slot 1, and then him activating slot 1, which means he's going to actually be ready to use that. I then make him go up in the air by 1 brick, because like I've told you before, you don't have to do this, but I prefer to use the agent to place bricks underneath him and he floats across the plane, so to speak, like spraying, kind of dropping the blocks underneath his feet rather than walking around and placing them behind him. Then I've got the repeat size times and then repeat size, so repeat 5 times a set of 5 walls. But what he does is he then reverses back, and if you remember how he did this last time, is he would place like a brick. He'd go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we do it towards the camera. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then he would reverse 5, and we'd move to the right by 1. So he'd go chunk over 1, and then he'd do another 5, and then across, and then another 5, and then across, and then another 5. So he'd end up making a solid shape. And I said to you, how might we edit this so that instead of making a square, he'd make a triangle? So if you've not yet solved this conundrum, I would invite you to pause the video at this point, and I would like you to try just for 5 minutes to see if you can do that. I will tell you that it's very, very similar to the code that we've written for the square, with a couple of changes, and that's to do with the fact that the amount of bricks that our guy is going to lay down is going to be different each time. So presumably, if we go back to the code, instead of laying 5 and 5 and 5 and 5 and 5 and so on, we kind of want it to lay 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, and then 5. There's a distinct pattern there of that variable is changing, and I clued you towards using this piece of code somewhere to change that and to be clever with how we move them around and when to move them around. So if you have not solved that, I want you to save it and have a go. If you have, I'm going to confirm the solution next. So pause now if you need to and try. If not, I'm going to now move on to the solution. Okay, if you're back, then you're ready to see the triangle solution. So I'm just going to drag it up because I've already done it. After it reloads, of course. Come on, up you come. Right, let's put these next to each other. So that one can go there. Bring this one across to here. Now if you look, the first difference is I'm starting on 1 and not setting my variable to 5, because I wanted to start on 1 and lay that first brick down, and then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5. So there's no difference there, but look what I've done here. Instead of repeating size times, because this was a perfect square, I'm setting how big the triangle goes up to now. So if I want the triangle at its biggest point to be 4 wide, this is where I'm putting this number. So I could put this up to 5, 6, 7. It's just how big the triangle's going to get. I can't set it to size because you would end up with 1 and it would stop. You would not have a triangle, you'd have one little brick. So I had to change this so that I can specify almost like how big it's going to get. Now the rest of the code is the same until we get to the end. And at the very end, I change that size variable by 1. So it's now 2. So if you can picture what's happening here, ignore the repeats for now, but repeat size times. So if we're on 1, we place a brick underneath ourselves. We then move forward, and then we reverse whatever size is on. So we've laid 1 brick, we reverse 1 brick, we then move right by 1, and then we increase the variable of size by 1, so it goes up to 2. If we repeat that 5 times, then on the next loop, size is 2. So it goes forward 2, places 2 bricks, reverses 2, goes right, then 3 bricks forward, 3 back, then right, then 4 back, and then right, and so on and so on. So not big changes to the code, but massive changes to the behavior of our little guy. So now if I get him to do the triangle, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So we can see there quite a lot of real power there behind just a couple of subtle changes. All right, so if you haven't managed to master the triangle, probably would invite you to have a go now. So if you still have to do it, please pause the vid and get that sorted. All right, and then you can come back to me. Right. So the next skill I want to show you is about using a function. Now, functions in any programming language are to do with a piece of code that's been written and can be called by any part of the program in order to run those elements of what's inside the function. You usually do it with repeated elements, things that the program keeps doing a lot of, and you want to minimize the amount you want to write in the program so that you can go, I need that function over there, please, so go and run it for me. If I give you an example from just any kind of random game, let's say we were playing snakes and ladders, presumably a lot of the time you want to roll a dice. So instead of putting the code necessary for rolling the dice in several times, every time the player needs to roll the dice, you could just make a little function that rolls that dice number and gives the value back. And so every time you need to roll a dice, you just go, roll the dice please, and it runs that little bit of code. Now we need to look for some obvious repetition, and the thing I found that I keep writing at the moment is this initial setup where we set a block and we give it to our agent, and we set his active slot, and we move him up in the air ready to do things. So these 3 commands, if I just move this out, these 3 commands here, I've used in both programs to initialize what I'm doing. So they're there, and they're also there. So I've stripped them out because basically they're the same and identical, and there are some subtle changes in some of the other things which are specific to the 2 shapes, but these 2 things are the same. So I probably could write a small function to represent this. So if I go to advanced, so you need to open up the advanced part of the code, go to functions, and I can create a function. Now there are some special options here which we'll look at later, but we need to give our function a name. I'm going to call it setup because it's the function's job is to set our agent up ready for the job by giving him some bricks and to elevate him ready to do his block placement. So I'll call it setup. So there we go. And I'm going to slide these 3 bricks in here. I don't need the other set because it's a duplicate. And there's our setup function now written. All we need now is to make sure that our square and our triangle programs, are the things which run when we call these words, do run this code as they did before. So if we go back to functions, we now have a new brick called call setup. where you call the function, I'll need it there, and I shall also need it there, and there we go. So we've saved ourselves writing code, and presumably if I now add some more programs, I can keep reusing this, and there's no reason why we can't tweak this to suit our needs. So you might have one called setup, which just gives maybe your little guy lots of different bricks in different slots, and doesn't set the active slot, and then you can then use this and call that setup, so he ends up getting like 5 types of bricks, and they're all in different slots, but that just sets him up and he moves him into the air ready. And then maybe in the program you can then just assign, oh, I want this active slot, or I want this active slot, so that you can lay the kind of colors you want to lay without cluttering up these programs with all of this kind of give them this, give them this, give them this, give them this. So that probably is a nice way of looking at it. But wherever we're repeating things, we can certainly look at using a function. So have a go now. So pause your video at this point and do have a go at creating a function that does these things and kind of brings it together. Spend a few moments to make sure you understand that and you are calling them from the right places of your program. So pause now and have a go at creating that function or something similar so that you can do it too. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to start creating more functions to then move towards a more challenging task. So if I go back to our code, I've made a few edits here for you to consider. So the first thing I've done is I've now changed my setup to give our little dude 2 types of brick in 2 different slots, but still to move him into the air ready to do his block placement. I've still got my teleport function, but now on starting the program, which you'll find under loops on start, so when I press this play button here, it will call the setup so that he gets given his blocks straight away, meaning I don't have to then put it anywhere else in the program. I've got my square and my triangle, but they're on chat calls. What I want to do is I want them to be in functions. So I'm going to strip that out. I'm going to take that out. I'm going to go back down to my functions and I'm going to create some more functions. So we'll call this square and we'll call this try for triangle. So we've got our triangle, which is this one, and our square, which is this one. Right, now that means that in our program at the moment, we've now preloaded on starting the program. We set up our guy to get his bricks. He's got no active slot yet, so this is important because I've stripped it out of here. So for these 2, let's say I want the square to be red and the triangles to be yellow. So we're going to need to go to our agent and we're going to have to go down to set active slots here. We're going to want 2 of those, so let's duplicate that. One of them is going to be on number 2. So the yellow one is going to be this and the red one is going to be this. There we go, that fixes that. So all the squares will always be in red and all the triangles will always be in yellow. But when we run this program, of course, nothing really is going to happen because all we've done is predefine these functions. Now, my big challenge to you, and it's a biggie, is to think and troubleshoot trying to create what looks like a flower head on the floor. Now, if you imagine, if I just go into Minecraft a sec and I'll just do this manually. Let's do something with similar colors, so yellow, and let's get this red. So if I take my yellow brick, which is the red brick, sorry, which will be the square, presumably what we're going to have, if I could press the right mouse button, let's get up here. It's not so easy on a touchpad, guys, I'm going to be honest. So you're going to have, come on, get down there. 1, 2, 3, 4. I wish I brought my mouse. I wish I brought my mouse. You would not believe how difficult Minecraft on a touchpad is. And if any of you ever play Minecraft on a touchpad at home, you're a better person than I am. Ah! Right, 3 years later, Mr. Chatton constructs a rudimentary square in Minecraft and is instantly regretting doing a 5x5 and not a 3x3. So that, and then if one petal now you've made your triangles at the moment to be like this, as in right angled triangles. Now, of course, you're not going to do this manually like me. I'm doing this so you can see what I mean, right? Then imagine you've got one here. And here. There we go. Now if I just zoom out and you imagine that there and there, it would look a bit like, kind of like a windmilly flower pattern. So there's a few things you need to consider. We have the code for a triangle and we have the code for a square. Our code for a triangle currently goes from 1 brick to 5. So it builds its triangles. So if we go back to the, oh, good show. If we go back to the view, it would build the triangle from that 1 there to the 5 there. Now you can use it like that, but it might be better to code it so it goes from 5 to 1 instead, so that it's easier to place the guide, because you're going to write a function in a minute, or a command, which will make an entire flower head built from the 2 functions now we have, a triangle and a square. So presumably, let's say our agent draws this square, where does he finish? So he's going to probably be stood to the right of the last row he did, so he'd probably be stood on this square here. So it'd be really handy if he then did, say, the 5, then the 4, then the 3, then the 2, then the 1, because he's right in the right position for it. And then he'll be probably stood somewhere around here, and you'd have to figure out how to then get him to here in a couple of commands, and then call the triangle function again. Then he draws this triangle, probably end up standing to the right of this square when he's finished, and then you want to move him to here. But this is a repeated pattern in its own right. So he does this shape, then we'll move to this location and do that shape, then he'll want to move to this location and draw another triangle, and then move to this location and draw another triangle. So it's all about breaking down the problem into stages and thinking, when I write the word flower, bearing in mind you might have to edit this triangle to go from 5 to 1 instead of 1 to 5, which is an easy change, because you just change that to 5, and you change this to minus, go on, click in there, -1. So that now goes 5 to 1 instead of 1 to 5. But what we want in there is we want a set of instructions to draw this thing. So presumably you would start with square, because that's the obvious start. Draw the square in the middle. That's that done. Then if it's lined up correctly, and I'm not saying it is because I haven't tested this, you would do call triangle, because then he would draw the coloured triangle because he's probably in the right position to do it straight away. But that would require a little bit of tweaking. Then there'll be some moves. He's going to have to move around, and then he'll have to call triangle again. But maybe if you're clever, maybe there's a way of actually using a repeat loop, because he's going to do something similar a set amount of times in order to draw the rest of the petals. So there's your lovely big challenge to take on. Once you have got these two sequences in functions, you can then call them at your heart's content and maybe even use some repetition. And I want to have a nice finished flower head with some triangles around on each side of this square, and that is the core challenge here. I'm not going to give you a solution today, but I think you've got enough to go at. So pause the video, have a go. I will leave you with my code, this window here, to use as a reference point for certain things, but you're going to need to do some editing. You're going to need to tweak and change and kind of make it your own. But good luck with it, and this will conclude this video. And then in the next video, I'll come back to this and show you what the solution looks like, and then we'll move on to even more interesting and complicated functions to really unlock the potential in this program. Okay, so I hope that's been useful. I hope it's been interesting. Good luck with it, and I'll talk to you next time. Take care.